The new face of Africa, I think, has to be a more self-determined, self-confident Africa. I think more and more we're seeing more competent Africans come to the fore. You've got a whole new generation of very educated young Africans who are not just educated for the sake of going into finance and business, but who are actually taking a keen interest into making a difference on the continent. So I think the new face of Africa has to be a younger, more determined, capable, and competent African. Before I joined the fellowship, a lot of my perspectives on Africa and the issues facing Africa were that it was poverty-driven, etc. What the fellowship allowed me to do was take a bigger macro view in terms of what the real issues are and what the drivers are. In terms of my leadership journey, I think it's allowed me to have context. Right, because a lot of you see events and issues and you think they are isolated. But what that Tutu fellowship did, it introduced me to a whole spectrum of different leaders, different perspectives, and made me more aware of the bigger picture, of the actual nuances and the different variables that are affecting the continent. I mean, the one that jumps to mind in terms of what biggest challenges that the leaders are facing has to be creating more leaders. Okay, so again, I talk about initially before the fellowship believing that Africa's issues were around poverty, but those are downstream issues, right? When you go further upstream, you realize that it comes down to things like policy and how policies, implemented and designed, and that's all leadership. And there's very few African leaders who've gone through the formal education, the understanding, and I think the biggest challenge for them is finding more people like themselves who are not only just informed, but are keen to actually make a difference. We can talk about, energy crisis, we can talk about health, but I think at the end of the day, if our focus comes down to leaders and what they need to do, if I had to say priority 101, I think it's identifying, nurturing, and cultivating new African leaders. Zimbabwe's gone through massive economic, cycles, ups and downs, and it's still going through a lot of challenges. But I think the question for the youth in Zimbabwe is the same one facing a lot of Africans, right? A lot of young Africans. It's identifying what role they can play, right? I mean, I think the most challenge I would give to them is find out about other Africans, challenge the stereotypes, challenge the current narrative that's out there about Africa. But the headline for me in terms of what young people need to worry about is education. Right? I think education not only liberates you from circumstances, but liberating your mind allows you to see other opportunities, whether it's in the entrepreneurial space, whether it's in formal education, formal employment spaces. I think that's something they need to focus on. And also learn about people around you. I mean, it's great to know about Europe, it's great to know about the US, Asia, etc. But there's a lot going on the continent. And I bet my journey in terms of understanding what's really going on the continent, the potential and the challenges, came a lot later. And I would say to them, find out more about what's going on around you, right? And the potential's there. I mean, we are the place to be for the next century.